up until this point, we've been fiddling around with sub-objects and moving things around and, playing with elements. So let's actually create some faces now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete these elements here. Just get rid of those. I'm going to come out of here, go into this object, select this element, delete that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to create some vertices. So let's zoom in here. And I'm going to put the vertices on the grid points here. I'm not going to use a snap. I'm just going to do it by hand. So to do that, I need to click on the create button up here. This allows me to create new vertices. And then don't forget this is the home grid. So when I click on it, I'm going to actually end up with my vertices on that home grid. If we had a custom grid setup, then the vertices would be created on that plane. But in this case, we've got the home grid active. So let's just click, 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 and click. So there we are. We've created some vertices. I'm just going to create a few more. There we go. And at this point, we've got this thing called a selection bracket, which is this box that we have here. Sometimes that can be a little bit irritating or distracting, so we can hide that just by pressing J on the keyboard, and that hides the selection bracket. You can still see you've got an object selected because its wireframe gets highlighted in white, but we don't have that annoying selection bracket, which can actually hide what we're working with. So I'm just going to leave that turned off. Go back into sub-object mode so we can see these vertices. And what we're going to do now is we're going to build some faces using these vertices. But to do that, again, I need to reinforce that they actually are. And normals are basically a representation of the direction that a face faces in. Faces in 3D software are always basically one-sided. So it's pretty hard to see that, but if I actually get some of the polygons here and delete them, when you look inside the cube, it looks like it's actually invisible on the backside. And that's just because the normals point outwards on this cube. So when you look at them from behind, if we go inside the cube, basically it disappears. We're inside the cube there. And that's because all of the normals point outwards. So we can show the normals. I'm just going to undo that so we get our face back. And we can actually show the normals by using this tick box here. And this spinner here controls how big they are. And you can only actually see them when you select some faces. So let's actually select some faces. And there you go. You can see the normals now. And as I said, if we use the spinner, we can change the length of them. The length doesn't actually matter. They're just vectors. They just basically display a direction. And you can see they're all basically pointing outwards from the cube. And that means that the face is visible in that direction, basically. So surface normals are defined by the direction which edges were created when you actually create that face. And for a normal to point towards you, you need to define the edges in a anti-clockwise manner. So, if we look at one of these faces here, we'll just click on this one face. To have this normal point towards us, I'd have to actually create this face in an anti-clockwise manner. So click here, then click here, and then click here. So we're traveling around in this direction. If I actually clicked in the opposite direction, if I clicked here, here, and here, and I did a clockwise direction, the normal would face the opposite direction. It would face inwards. And let me just show you quickly what happens if we just edit some of these normals and change their direction. I'll just select all the faces. And in surface properties here, you can see we've got normals, and I can actually flip the direction of the normals after they're created. And now all the normals face inwards, and you can see the box looks really weird. I mean, it's kind of like an optical illusion. But basically, all of the normals are pointing inwards now, and that means that all the faces can only be seen from the inside. They can't be seen from the outside. You can only see the back face of them, as it were. So I can just select them all again by pressing Control A, and I can flip them again, and that gets us back to where we were before. Now, I'm just going to turn off Show Normals for the moment. We've got vertices down here, which are ready to have faces built. So I'm going to build them so they face towards me, and then I'm going to build them so they face away from me. So let me just show you building them towards me first. Click on there, and then click on Create, so I can actually create a face now. It's just a simple case of clicking on the vertices that you want to join together, to create a face. So basically click here and here, that creates one edge. And then click here. We've already selected this one by default. And you can see now we define another edge. And when we do that, we create a face. Now I'm going to create a quad here. So I'm going to click here, here, and here. Again, going anti-clockwise. And there we are. We have another face. Now the normals are actually facing towards us, as you can see. But if we look on the other side, that means that we can't see the faces on the other side. So if I click off create and I select this face here and delete it, and then delete it, we go into vertex mode, you can see that we've actually lost these vertices because they were actually attached to these faces. So as I said earlier, faces won't necessarily delete objects, things like vertices and edges when you delete them, but if they're not used by any other geometry, then they will. So we need to recreate these vertices. So I'm just going to create these here, 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 and here. And what I'm going to do now is go back into face mode and click on create again. And I'm going to create some faces again. Now what I'm going to do this time, I'm going to go clockwise. So here, here, and here. Can't actually see what I've done there. And I also can't see the vertex, and that's because the face is flipped around, and therefore I won't actually display the face for me. So now we've created one face, so I'm just going to try and create another one here. There we are. So even though we can't see it, it's still actually there. So we can select it here and here. So there we go. We've actually created another face, but we can't see it. So what we need to do is look around the other side. So there we are. There's the face. And if I turn on show normals, there you are. You can see the normals facing the other direction. So rather than recreating these faces, I can just select them, as I've done here, then go to surface properties and flip. And that will actually make the normals point round in the other direction. So you can see the direction in which you create faces is actually really important. It defines which way the normals face. And so therefore, when you're building faces, pretty much you always want to be building the faces in an anti-clockwise direction. So let me just quickly show you some of these tools, these normal editing tools here. We have flip, which actually flips the direction of the currently selected faces. And then we have unify, which I'll leave for a second. I'll come to that in a second. And then we have flip normal mode. And what that does is it allows you to just click on faces and flip the normals around on them. So you can see it actually creating the impression that this box has got holes in it. But in fact, all I'm doing is just flipping the normals on these faces. And this is creating these sort of black areas, and that's because these faces are trying to smooth. And effectively what's happening here is actually trying to smooth over 180 degrees, and that basically that makes it look quite strange, because inside the cube it's dark and outside the cube it's light. So it's actually going from this vertex here, which is dark, and trying to shade all the way over to light there. So it gives you this kind of weird look. So now that we have some faces pointing inwards and some pointing out, I just want to show you what the unify tool does. In theory, it doesn't always work, but what it tries to do is it tries to analyze a mesh, work out the average direction of the normal, and then flip any other faces to face in the same direction as the average. So you can see that on average, the faces were pointing outwards. So it then flips any normals which aren't facing outwards. So basically unifies their direction. And this can be a useful tool when you get meshes from external other packages, you know, Maya, XSI, or maybe a landscape generation tool, or some kind of NURBS modeling system. You may find that sometimes the normals are flipped. They actually face the wrong direction. So it's actually quite a useful tool in those circumstances. To be honest, it's not perfect. Sometimes you'll find it fails. It will sometimes unify nicely. On other occasions, it won't actually do anything. And that means in those circumstances, you may have to go in and manually, you know, select edges like this. And then when you're happy with your selection, click on flip to flip them around. Or the other option is to just click on flip normal mode and then just click on the mesh to change the orientation of any normals that you think are wrong and get them back to where they should be. So it is actually a really You know, it's a key tool, especially when you're working with other software. Being able to know where to find the normal tools, where to go in and be able to flip them around where needed. Before we finish off here with our mesh editing, let me just show you one last illustration of the differences between the edit mesh and the edit poly. And for that, we just need a few more vertices here. I'm just going to create more vertices just by having these selected and then shift dragging upwards, which will create new vertices. And you can say clone them to another object, which will create a new object and put these vertices into it, which in this case we don't want to do. We just want to make a new element. So just say OK. I'm going to do that again in the opposite direction. Say OK for that. And in this case, this particular example, we don't really need that face, but we do need to create two more. So I'm just going to go here, here, and here. And then I'm just going to go here, here, and here. And we've done something here which is actually impossible to do with an edit poly, because what we've done is we've created three faces and they all share the same edge, which is this edge along here. So I can, move this around, I can move this around. If you look, if I grab this edge here, sorry, this face, and I move it, you can see it's pulling the others. And that's because they all share the same edge. Let me just go here to show you that. This may look like a cool thing, but it's actually not such a great feature really, because it causes what's called a rat's nest. And by that, it means that you can have any number of polygons all connected together via one edge. And this is a complete mess. It's very difficult to sort that out. It doesn't create a nice surface, for instance. So the other thing it can cause is I found that if I try and select that edge, that shared edge, it's actually really difficult to select as well, which makes working with this edge very, very difficult. It's very problematical. And you may be thinking, what am I talking about there? Well, I am selecting that edge, just like I could select that edge over there. When I select this edge over here, you can see I get this gizmo, and I can move the edge around. But when I'm trying to select this edge here, I'm not getting anything. I just can't seem to select that edge. Ah, there we go. But, that was just luck. That took a lot of selections there to actually get that. So you can see having multiple faces using one edge is actually not such a great thing at all. And it's not really possible at all with Edit Poly. Now, if I just get rid of one of those faces, I can just delete that. Now, if I try and select that edge, you can see it's actually quite easy to do now that we just have two faces here. So I'm just going to undo that and bring that face back. And what I'm going to do now, just to finish off, is I'm just going to select this object and I'm going to say convert to editable poly. There we go. You can see there were some changes there. Some of them not so pretty, but that's inherent in the way Edit Poly works. But if I go in and start editing it, and you can see I haven't got this face button anymore. I've got some different buttons here, and we'll come to those later. But basically, if I'm going to select any of these polygons, I need to use this button here. Now, if I select this one, and this one, you can see that if I move this, we've got a slightly different thing going on. This face is now not attached to these two anymore by the shared edge that they used to share. And the reason for that is it's impossible in an edit poly to have more than two polygons using one edge. And that means that when we converted this object into an edit poly, it looked at this and it evaluated it and it said, well, that's not going to happen. I just can't handle that geometry. So it resolved it in the way that it could, and it actually split off this face and gave it its own unique edge here. So as you can see, another quite major difference between the edit poly and edit mesh. So anyway, let's move on from the difference between edit mesh and edit poly for now. Let's have a look at efficient manipulation of our mesh next. So before we do that, let me just clean up here. There we go. Let's leave our scene nice and neat.